All right, hello everyone, and welcome to what is kind of one of the most long-expected, long-running, long-awaited verdicts I think I'll ever do. Today I'm going to talk about Metroid Dread. Metroid Dread is the sequel to Metroid Fusion, which if you know anything about me, you know I'm a huge Metroid fan, and I absolutely love Fusion. It's one of my favorite games. It's a game I play almost every couple of months at this point. I used to play it more often. And we finally, after 19 years, have a sequel to it. Metroid Dread starts out as Samus is investigating the planet of ZDR, which is a remote planet where the X parasites have been seen. And if you don't know what those are, it's a big plot point in Fusion that the X parasites have infested the biological space laboratories, which is where the game takes place. And the biggest threat is that they'll escape and then multiply throughout the galaxy and basically doom galactic civilization as they spread around. So Samus immediately sets out to ascertain the threat, see if it's just a fake video, or see if it's actually something going on. Additionally, the Galactic Federation has sent ahead of her, obviously knowing what they did in Fusion, 7 robots capable of presumably collecting these and also doing reconnaissance. These MEs eventually turn on Samus, which is what you see on the box art, and they stalk her throughout some segments of the game. It's important to note that they do not stalk her the entire game. There is still tons of traditional Metroid bosses and other things going on in this game. So don't feel like, oh, this whole game you're just being pursued in each area by an enemy. It's good portions of each area, but it's not a major thing in the game. Now, Metroid Dread, like every other Metroid game except for the Prime series, is a 2D side scroller. You basically platform while fighting your way around different areas and gaining different upgrades that allow you to progress to a variety of different things. So you might get an upgrade, for instance, that might let you get past a certain type of door, or let you, jump past certain threats, or just be able to exist in certain areas like extreme temperatures or lava. And Metroid, as is typical, as is per usual, because it's one of the franchises that make up Metroidvanias. Definitely brought a couple of new additions to this. For the most part, Dread plays very similarly to other Metroidvanias. For instance, one new ability that's completely new to Samus in this game is her ability to slide. If you press ZL at any point while running, Samus will begin to slide. If you double tap it while running, Samus will actually automatically transform into her Morph Ball, which is actually really cool. So you can very easily transform between these 3 different states, which I think is really nice. Samus also retains her ability to use the melee counter, which is something that she got from, or something that was added to Samus Returns, which was the remake of Metroid 2. Using the melee counter on enemies will just normally stun them for half a second or so, or it might not do anything. But if an enemy is in the middle of a parryable attack, which is shown by a whitish silverish glint on the front of their attack, then Samus will be able to basically stun them for a long period of time, automatically take aim at them, and you can unleash more damage on them, sometimes outright killing them instantly with the first shot. This also can be used on boss fights to deal a lot of damage to bosses. So for instance, if a boss has a certain attack that's parryable, you will be able to parry their attack, and usually will lead to either big damage or a cinematic, sort of very epic cinematic style attack. You can kill bosses using these. It's just basically an opportunity for you to get some free damage. They look great. It's really fun to have. Those are the 2 major mobility upgrades that Samus has. Wall jumping is easier in this game than probably almost any other 2D Metroid, and I would say that it's easier. It's still something that you practice a little bit. You got to know the angles and everything, but wall jumping is in, and for the most part it's easier, but I think that it's more required in this game to wall jump. I think that especially when you're trying to evade enemies, for instance, or trying to dodge boss attacks, sometimes the best thing that you could do to dodge it while still maintaining some kind of pressure, or not necessarily resorting to spin jumping away or whatever, is to just really briefly bounce off a wall. I think that is still a pretty, especially early in the game, is still a pretty strong way for you to dodge attacks while maintaining your offensive momentum on enemies. Additionally, You have the ability to free aim. Now, this was something that was in Samus Returns. It returns in this game. Samus can, when you hold L, Samus will root herself in place, and you could still melee, you could still do other things, but basically allows you to free aim your stick all over the place without fear of moving. It's kind of similar to Metroid Prime, at least the original incarnations of Metroid Prime, not the Wii versions, where you can press and hold R and Samus will stop moving to allow you to free aim with the left stick. It's pretty much the exact same thing, just on a 2D scale. It's helpful at times. You can use it while you're moving. Like, let's say you're jumping, you could stop jumping to start aiming. It's pretty helpful. I'm not a super huge fan of being forced to root yourself in place. I wish there was like a way that you could still like sidestep or something back and forth at the minimum while you aim. But it's still a very helpful ability, and it's still something that definitely they want you to use throughout the game. Especially as enemies fly around you, or if there's a weak point or something that you're trying to aim at. It's used for puzzles as well as combat, which is nice. Speed Booster returns. This time, Speed Booster is something that you manually trigger. You do not randomly start Speed Boostering after just running for so long, which is kind of cool that they have that ability in this game compared to the GBA Metroids. I would say that the Shine Spark puzzles in this game are pretty intense. A lot of them require you to wall jump off of walls to maintain your speed boost. To understand how speed boosting works in conjunction with sliding, opening doors, killing enemies while doing it. There's a lot of crazy stuff that you could do with the speed booster, so it's good to see that a lot of the puzzles that might have been in like Zero Mission, or even just some new ones, are in this game to provide variety. You're not just running through the same couple of areas over and over and over again, just trying to do the same thing, you know, on flat surfaces. It's nice to know that that's a thing. Now, one thing that I do like, but also has a negative drawback to it, is the Phantom Cloak. The Phantom Cloak is one of the earlier abilities in the game. Basically what it will do is that Samus has this bar called, I think it's Aeon. It was called Aeon in Samus Returns. This is another thing that returns from Samus Returns. I should mention that Samus Returns was developed 4 years ago by the same team. This is the same group of people. That's why it has a lot of the same, same sort of elements and stuff. Now, the Aeon Gauge allows Samus to use one of 3 different abilities. The biggest 2 that you're going to use are the Aeon Flash, which is like a fast sidestep, as well as the Phantom Cloak, which basically turns Samus invisible. Now, the Phantom Cloak, the reason why I think the Phantom Cloak is kind of cool early game and very lackluster late game is, like, while it does prevent enemies from noticing you if they didn't see you before you used it, it is really mainly supposed to be used in conjunction with the Emmy stages. And the Emmys, Emmys basically have this vast area in like, I think 6 or so of the areas. There's and basically zones that are called like Emmy zones. Like, the Emmys patrol them. If an Emmy encounters Samus, you'll have, I didn't know this at the time, you'll have 2 chances to perform basically a very strict melee counter to get it off of her. Otherwise, you get instant death. Obviously, I would argue that the best way to do it is to avoid Emmys entirely, which I'll talk about later. But the Phantom Cloak is designed to help you avoid these Emmys. If you're in certain locations, Emmys will not enter it. They actually showed this off on the trailer. I wish that this aspect of the game, this stealth aspect, was expanded upon. In my experience, every time I tried to use the Phantom Cloak to evade an Emmy, basically the Emmy would just walk right into me anyway. Even if I was on the ceiling, let's say, and the Emmy was patrolling the room or something, they would just randomly jump to the ceiling for no reason. And to me, that says that the game is cluing them in way too hard, as opposed to it being, a natural thing where, like, yeah, they're looking, like, the whole point of the Emmys is that they have this big wide radius that they can detect you in. They can detect the vibrations in the air, so you moving and running around is going to, let them know, potentially, depending how close and how far their range is. Each Emmy also has a different ability, which makes them very, very ominous threats. They're dangerous, obviously. If you can't complete the QuickTime events, you're dead if one touches you. And that's all an Emmy needs to do to trigger the QuickTime event, is it needs to just touch you. You can't stun them unless you successfully pull off your melee counter, which, again, is not really a viable thing. I wouldn't suggest doing it. there's no way to really stun them. Your best bet is to just run from them. And like normally I would say something like, well, your best bet might also be to hide from them, right? Using the Phantom Cloak, you know, like let's say like, you know, like a stealth game. You know, maybe in a 3D game that works because there's more, you know, there's a whole extra dimension of depth where you could hide behind stuff or anything like that. But because it's 2D, your only options are either left or right or up or down. And obviously, since you can't fly while using the Phantom Cloak because it reduces your mobility, not that Samus could fly anyway without the space jump, you don't really have many options. Now, there are small nooks and alcoves where you could hide in while using it. And that will make it so the Emmy, if it's not already on alert mode, it's like Metal Gear where they can go on caution mode and they'll try to like find you and stuff. They won't see you. They'll just walk right. They might scan it and then they'll just walk right on. And it's cool and all, but I mean, like the biggest problem with the Phantom Cloak is that it doesn't really help you that much based on how this game is designed. In my experience from the 3 playthroughs of this game I've done so far, your best bet when dealing with an Emmy is to just run. There's no other way around it. Your best bet is just to get the fuck away from them. There's no real point in sticking around and using like a strategy to maybe bait them and waiting for it to patrol by you or something. I never really found that as a strategy that was really helpful. And yeah, it doesn't like even though like the Phantom Cloak is used for getting past certain doors, I still think that the best way to get by all of these different things is just to avoid Emmys as much as possible and to run from place to place. And obviously on your first playthrough when you don't know where you're going, it's harder, but on subsequent playthroughs, there's not really any reason to use the Phantom Cloak. It doesn't get much use. So maybe in another game it would be really helpful. It'll be really kind of cool and if it had like an extra ability or something, but it's not a bad thing. It's just not particularly great. The other thing I would say is that the Emmys themselves, like I said, are just a little bit too psychic. They get some random spawns, which some of them are real. Like in most areas, you know, usually they'll spawn in 1 or 2 areas when you enter via a certain door. And then they'll try to basically like seek you out. The game is really just pulling them towards you at some points. Like sometimes they'll go away if you make no noise. But the second that they start, like I feel like the second the game really feels like you're making progress in an area, like trying to get through it quickly, it pretty much phones it in. It tells them exactly where to go, and that obviously is kind of cool in some ways because in certain areas, you know, it leads to like, you know, chasing and it makes you make quick decisions. It's kind of cool. It's fun to do that. But also it means that there's not really many ways to avoid it in areas where, you know, you might be hindered or there might be, you know, not as many ways for you to avoid it. And so I kind of wish that the Emmys actually had to search for you. Now, obviously, this sort of technology has been around since, to my knowledge, Resident Evil 3. And obviously we had the remakes of Resident Evil 2, where they sort of had Mr. X patrol in a certain way. There's been Alien Isolation. And while I wouldn't put the Emmys on that level of cunning necessarily, I would definitely say that there is room for them to actually, you know, still be an omnipresent threat when you're trying to avoid them, but also don't make it so that there's pretty much no way around them. Especially with some of the later Emmys have really ridiculous abilities. One of them has essentially wall hacks. Wherever you are in his zone, he can detect you, and he has basically a taser. A lot of the later game Emmys move at very high speeds, which makes them even harder to avoid. If you get them on like a linear plateau, they're very, very hard to avoid. One of the Emmys has basically a hit scan beam. And by the way, you know, unlike unlike past Metroid games, rooms are loaded next to each other. So for instance, an Emmy could be in another room, right? And the game will be tracking that in real time. Like, it's not like it's pretending, you know, like it's pretending to move the Emmy and only spawning it when it gets to your room. No, these Emmys will be in other rooms doing other things, and, you know, they could maybe detect you through a wall. They'll come through the door. You could see them load in as they walk in through the door, which is cool because, you know, it's like a Terminator, you know, Alien sort of a deal. But it's also like, you can't really avoid them. Like, they're always there. So sometimes they'll just place an Emmy right in front of you and there's not really anything that you can do about it. And sometimes they'll be off, you'll bypass the shit out of them and they'll never even know that you're there, which I guess is ultimately the thing about having these sorts of AI. Sometimes you'll just know how to avoid them, sometimes you'll luck out. I just kind of wish that there was a little bit more variety in the ways you could get around Emmys. There's a lot of water sequences where you don't have the gravity suit, where the Emmys aren't really affected. there's a lot of things I wish that the Phantom Cloak could help more with, but that's besides the point. I wish, while I'm on the topic of things I wish this game had, I feel like this game could have used one more area. Obviously rebalance the timing and everything for beating the game, but I feel like this game has a good amount of stuff in it. But if I feel like there's one more area to really make use of all of these abilities, it would have been like a good final challenge for the game. If that means they needed to add one more Emmy and more stuff and diversify and spread stuff out, I would be cool with it. I think that one more area could have really solidly benefited this game in the long run. Not that the areas that are there are bad. You have your typical lava area, your water area, your big nature area. It's your usual Metroid selection of areas. But what I will say is that the areas that are there are still good. They're still fun, and I actually really do enjoy going around all of these different areas and seeing the different things. There's ways to use things like the grapple beam. There's multiple ways to get pickups and solve puzzles, which I think is really good. On top of that, there is also there's also different ways to get power-ups. For instance, there's I don't want to talk too much about the story, obviously, because if you're a Metroid fan, it's definitely worth diving into. There's tons of ways. There's bosses that can give it up. You could find them from Chozo statues and stuff like that. And all in all, I like the progression of this game. I think that this game never really makes the mistake of getting too bogged down in any one portion, which I think is really cool. A lot of games, they might end up being stuck too hard in one or two areas, and then it sort of feels like it's dragging on. I feel like Metroid Dread definitely goes the extra mile to ensure that it doesn't do that. And I think Mercury Steam has a good grasp on what makes a solid Metroid game. And so, because of that, I got to give it credit for that. I feel like the combat is fast-paced enough. Once you really get the feel of the controls and the enemy types and the gameplay, you can breeze through areas. You could deal tons of damage to enemies, which I like. There's a variety of both new and old pickups. Like I said, there's some that return from Prime series, which is kind of cool. As I said, the only lackluster one I think that wasn't around is there's no boost ball. And while there is a spider ball sort of element, it's not for the morph ball, which I think was a little interesting. There's not a lot of morph ball upgrades in this game, which I think maybe that could have been used in one final area, maybe, sort of to use all these different abilities, which I think would be the only thing I would really say is between that and the Phantom Cloak not really helping too much with stealth. I feel like there could have been maybe one more area to fully use everything, definitely an end of game area, sort of, and that doesn't mean there can't be any power-ups there, but other than that, I really love this game. And I actually, it's hard for me to even believe that this game really does exist. To think that, through all the lore of its development and everything going on, that this game actually does exist and it's fun and it's pretty much, for the most part, everything I would have wanted out of a Metroid game is pretty crazy in my opinion. So ultimately, what would I give Metroid Dread? Metroid Dread for me was a solid experience from start to finish, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it looks really good for what's available on the Switch. Obviously, the Switch is not a graphical powerhouse, but ultimately I still had a fun time with it. And honestly, if I were to give it a score, I'd give Metroid Dread a 94 out of 100. And the reason I say that is because after my 3 playthroughs of it, I still find the gameplay loop fun. I find the bosses very, very exciting and interesting. There's a variety of ways to kill a couple of them, which is cool. There's some sequence breaks, which are always fun. And it feels like they understood the DNA of what makes a Metroid game interesting and fun. And that, to me, speaks, volumes about the people making it. It means that they understand how to make one. And, especially after a drought of so many years with no good Metroid games, I felt very satisfied leaving this game. I felt that there was enough story elements in it. There's more cutscenes and dialogue in it than the average Metroid game, but still less than Fusion and Other M, which were very talkative. There's definitely a lot of references, both not only to Mercury Steam's last entry, but also to the general series as a whole. And as they said, it's the culminating arc for the Metroid saga. The Metroids as a whole. Their storyline comes to an end here. And in my opinion, I think that it pretty much does a good job of satisfying the core requirements. So for what it's worth, I really liked Metroid Dread. I think it's a very solid package. It's definitely something worth replaying, and it's definitely a very skillful game between the Emmys and some of the execution on the bosses. They made sure that this game was not going to be just like a walk in the park in a lot of ways, but when you really grasp the controls and do really well, I feel like you're rewarded for really being able to get a handle on it and to do very well. So that's all I have to say for Metroid Dread. I think it's a very fun game. I know I will play it many years into the future. I've already done 3 playthroughs of it in the past month, and I probably should have done more, but I will do more. And I hope I can. I'll see you guys for Metroid Prime 4 or Metroid 6, whatever comes out later. So peace.